Ethan Morales never thought a simple lane change would be the last decision of his life, and Derek Cole never realized that one moment of rage would turn him from an ordinary man into a killer. What began as a flash of anger on a crowded Florida highway would spiral into a nightmare that shocked the entire state. A story of pride, fury, and the deadly cost of losing control behind the wheel. The Florida sun was merciless that afternoon, burning down on the endless stretch of highway that cut through the outskirts of Orlando. The air shimmered like liquid heat, making everything look distorted and unreal. Asphalt steamed beneath the weight of hundreds of cars crawling through late-day traffic. Among them, Derek Cole's aging blue pickup rattled like it might fall apart at any moment. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white, his jaw set in silent frustration. Every honk, every red light, every brake light in front of him felt like a personal attack. Derek was 42, a man worn down by disappointment. His life had once been stable. Steady job, small house, a wife who used to smile at him. But that was before the layoffs, before the fights, before his temper began to burn holes through everything he cared about. He'd been let go from his warehouse job 2 weeks earlier, a casualty of cost-cutting measures. The words still echoed in his mind like a cruel joke. His wife, tired of his anger and his inability to move on, had left with their daughter. Now his house felt like a prison, quiet, empty, and filled with memories of a life that no longer belonged to him. The truck's air conditioner had long stopped working, so he drove with the windows down, letting the hot wind slap his face. Sweat dripped down his neck and soaked into his shirt. The radio crackled, playing a dull country song that only made his mood worse. He turned it off and gritted his teeth. Traffic slowed again near an intersection, and Derek muttered under his breath, pounding the steering wheel. It felt like the entire world was mocking him. Slow drivers, flashing lights, endless heat. He was a man teetering on the edge, and he didn't even realize how close he was to losing control. When a silver sedan merged into his lane without signaling, Derek's blood pressure spiked instantly. He slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as his truck lurched forward, barely avoiding a collision. The driver in the sedan didn't even look back. That single, careless move lit a fire inside Derek that burned hotter than the sun above. His pulse quickened, and the roar of his truck's engine became the only sound he could hear. His thoughts blurred into a single angry rhythm. It wasn't just about the car cutting him off. It was everything. Every humiliation, every failure, every word his wife had thrown at him when she walked out. It all condensed into that one moment of fury. He gripped the steering wheel so hard it hurt. The driver in the silver car had no idea he'd become the target of years of pent-up rage. Derek could feel his heart pounding like a drum, his breathing shallow, his body tense as if preparing for battle. He pressed his foot on the gas, the old truck groaning in protest as it picked up speed. Dust and heat swirled around him as he began to follow the sedan through the lanes, eyes locked forward, mind empty except for one thought, to make the other driver pay. The Florida sky glared down mercilessly, but Derek didn't see it. He only saw red. The chase began almost without thought, a surge of adrenaline guiding Derek's every move. The silver sedan ahead weaved through the lanes, trying to gain distance, but Derek's pickup stayed glued to its tail. The truck's old engine roared, shaking violently as he pushed it harder than it was ever meant to go. Horns blared around him, drivers swerved to get out of the way, and the sound of screeching tires filled the heavy Florida air. It wasn't a highway anymore. It was a racetrack fueled by rage and fear. Derek's grip on the wheel was tight enough to make his fingers ache, his vision narrowing until all he saw was the gleam of the silver car ahead. The sedan belonged to Ethan Morales, a young father finishing another long day at work. He had left the office in a hurry, eager to pick up his 2 children from daycare before closing time. The last thing he expected was a stranger's truck chasing him down the highway. He checked his rearview mirror, heart pounding as he realized the pickup hadn't backed off once. Every time he switched lanes, It followed. Every time he slowed, it closed the gap. Panic began to set in. He wasn't dealing with ordinary road rage anymore. He was dealing with something darker, something unhinged. Ethan tried to focus, scanning the road for an exit, a police car, anything that could help. The highway stretched endlessly, flanked by pine trees and billboards, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the asphalt. Traffic was thinning as the city faded behind them. Derek's truck loomed closer, his headlights flashing repeatedly. Each flash felt like a warning, but Derek wasn't warning anyone. He was hunting. His breathing was erratic, his hands slick with sweat, but he couldn't stop himself. The more the sedan tried to flee, the more determined he became. The chase wasn't about traffic anymore. It had turned into something personal. Ethan took a sudden right at the next exit, hoping to lose the truck in the maze of smaller roads that cut through the countryside. Derek followed instantly. The two vehicles tore down a narrow two-lane stretch, lined with tall grass and scattered mailboxes. The road twisted through open farmland, empty except for a few houses in the distance. The speed was reckless. Gravel kicked up from under their tires, hitting windshields and fenders. The sound of engines echoed across the open fields like thunder. Ethan's mind raced. He could feel his pulse in his ears, his chest tight with fear. He tried to call 911, fumbling with his phone, but the signal dropped as he drove deeper into the rural area. His only thought was to keep moving. If he stopped, he didn't know what the man behind him would do. Meanwhile, Derek's thoughts were a blur of anger and satisfaction. Every second of pursuit gave him a twisted sense of control he hadn't felt in years. The road ahead curved sharply around a cluster of trees, and Ethan took it too fast, his tires skidding. The sedan swerved, barely regaining balance. Derek's truck followed, the distance between them closing fast. The highway lights had vanished behind them, replaced by the orange glow of dusk creeping across the horizon. The chase had left the world of witnesses and entered a place where silence and shadows ruled. The two vehicles came to a stop on a deserted back road surrounded by dense trees and long stretches of uncut grass. The sky had turned a deep orange, fading into purple as the sun slipped below the horizon. Crickets had begun their nightly chorus, and the air was thick with humidity. Ethan's car rolled to a shaky halt on the gravel shoulder, his hands trembling as he reached for the ignition, his heart hammered in his chest, the echo of the chase still ringing in his ears. He stared into his rearview mirror and saw the blue pickup stop a few yards behind him, its headlights cutting through the growing darkness. The beams stayed on him, bright and unwavering, pinning him in place like prey caught in a hunter's gaze. Derek sat motionless behind the wheel, his chest heaving with every breath. His hands were sore from gripping the steering wheel, his temples pulsing with heat. The truck's engine idled roughly, rattling and popping like it might die at any moment. His mind was a storm of confusion and rage. He told himself that the man in the sedan had disrespected him, had endangered him, had mocked him with that careless swerve on the highway. In truth, Derek didn't fully understand why his anger had reached this point. He only knew he couldn't walk away now. His pride, his fury, his broken sense of control demanded an end. Ethan sat frozen in his seat, the glow of his phone screen lighting his face as he tried again to call for help. The signal flickered and vanished. Panic surged through him as he looked up and saw Derek's truck door swing open. The sound of metal groaning filled the quiet road. Derek stepped out slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. The headlights cast his shadow long and sharp across the ground. He moved toward the sedan with deliberate steps, each one heavier than the last, his jaw clenched, his eyes wild. He didn't shout or say a word. His anger was beyond words now. It was something physical, something alive inside him. Ethan's breath came fast and uneven as he scrambled to lock the doors, his hands shaking so badly he could barely press the buttons. He looked up just as Derek reached the side of his car. The two men locked eyes through the glass, and for a brief moment, there was silence. The kind that comes before disaster. Derek turned away, walked back to his truck, and reached inside. When he reappeared, he was holding a tire iron, its metal surface glinting in the headlights. The sound of the first impact broke the stillness like a gunshot. Glass shattered, scattering shards across the ground. The next strike came harder, fueled by years of resentment and helplessness. Derek's movements grew faster, his breathing louder, his anger unstoppable. When the noise finally ceased, the road was quiet again. The cicadas hummed, and the last streaks of daylight faded completely. Derek stood motionless, the tire iron hanging loosely from his hand. His chest rose and fell, his vision blurred, his body trembling not from exertion but from the cold realization of what he had done. He stared at the broken window, at the motionless figure inside, unable to comprehend the weight of his own actions. The silence pressed against him, heavy and endless, and for the first time that day, Derek felt fear. Not of anyone else, but of himself. Morning came softly over the Florida countryside, sunlight spilling across the fields and filtering through the trees that lined the narrow back road. Dew clung to the blades of grass, glistening like glass in the early light. The road itself was quiet, untouched, until a delivery driver taking a shortcut noticed something strange ahead. A silver sedan parked at an odd angle on the shoulder. Its driver's side door was half open and the windshield was cracked. Curious, the man slowed, honked once, and when there was no movement, he pulled over. What he saw when he approached froze him where he stood. Within minutes, he was back in his truck, fumbling to call 911, his hands trembling too badly to hold the phone steady. Deputies from the Osceola County Sheriff's Office arrived first. The area was remote, the kind of place where sound didn't travel far, and witnesses were rare. Yellow tape soon marked the scene as investigators examined the car. The details told a grim story. Shattered glass across the front seat, blood on the steering wheel, and a phone on the passenger side with a half-typed emergency number. There were no signs of theft. Wallet, keys, and valuables were untouched. The violence looked impulsive, born not of greed, but of fury. Detective Carla Jennings, one of the first on scene, stood quietly as the forensic team worked. She had seen plenty of road rage cases before, but this one felt different. Something about it was too sudden, too personal. She noted the deep tire tracks behind the car, suggesting another vehicle had stopped abruptly. She followed the marks down the road until they faded into the dirt. A few fragments of blue paint glimmered on the asphalt. It wasn't much, but it was something. By noon, news crews were setting up along the highway, filming their reports as the coroner's van left the scene. The story spread quickly, a suspected road rage killing on a quiet Florida road. Reporters described it as senseless, tragic, and shocking, words that would replay for days on local broadcasts. Investigators began gathering footage from traffic cameras near the highway exits. Though the back road had no surveillance, the connecting highways did. Hours of grainy video showed glimpses of the chase. A silver sedan followed closely by a blue pickup truck, weaving through lanes before both disappeared off the last exit camera. Detective Jennings focused on the truck. Her team traced the model, likely an older Ford, possibly late 90s, with damage on the front bumper. They began running license plates for similar vehicles in nearby counties. The evidence wasn't strong yet, but the pattern was forming. The fragments of paint from the scene matched the faded blue found on older Ford models. Witness calls began trickling in, too. Drivers who remembered seeing two cars speeding dangerously along the highway that evening. One remembered the truck's driver clearly, a middle-aged man with a hard expression, gripping the wheel like he wanted to crush it. By nightfall, the investigation had momentum. The team had a make, a partial description, and a direction. The killer had vanished after the attack, but he had left behind enough to follow. The road where it happened was cleared, yet an uneasy silence lingered in the air, as if the place itself remembered what it had seen. The only sounds were the whisper of wind through the trees and the low hum of passing cars, unaware of the violence that had taken place just beyond the bend. Derek Cole's name would soon be whispered across Florida highways, not as a driver, but as a warning. What began as an ordinary evening commute had turned into a manhunt that gripped the state with disbelief. While investigators traced fragments of paint and bits of rage left behind on the asphalt, Derek hid in plain sight, his mind unraveling as quickly as the story spreading on every news channel. He had become the very thing he once cursed on the road, reckless, dangerous, and completely out of control. Back at his small, cluttered home, Derek sat in silence. The blinds were drawn, and the faint light from a television flickered across his face. Every station carried the same story: the silver sedan, the unsolved road rage killing, the hunt for the driver of a blue pickup. He recognized his truck immediately in the grainy footage from a highway camera. The world outside knew what he had done, even if his name hadn't been released yet. He told himself it wasn't his fault, that it was an accident, that the man shouldn't have provoked him. But no matter how many times he replayed it in his head, the sound of breaking glass and the stillness that followed wouldn't fade. Detective Carla Jennings sat at her desk, staring at the photos pinned to the caseboard. The victim, the car, the paint fragments. She had a gut feeling about the kind of man she was looking for: someone ordinary, someone angry, someone who'd lost too much control too quickly. The team began canvassing local repair shops, hoping to find a damaged blue pickup brought in after the night of the murder. 3 days later, they got a hit. Later, a mechanic remembered a man who'd shown up early one morning with a front bumper dented and streaked with silver paint. He paid in cash and seemed anxious to leave. The mechanic had written down the license plate number on the work order, a habit that would prove vital. That evening, deputies surrounded Derek's small rental house on the outskirts of Kissimmee. Inside, he sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped together, eyes fixed on nothing. The knock at the door came soft at first, then louder. When the red and blue lights flashed through the thin curtains, Derek didn't move. He knew what waited outside. He walked slowly to the sink, splashed cold water on his face, and looked at his reflection, a man he no longer recognized. When officers entered, he didn't resist. The arrest was quiet, almost anticlimactic, but the silence spoke louder than any struggle. News of his capture spread before dawn. Reporters filled the streets, neighbors stood on their lawns whispering his name. In interviews that followed, detectives described him as calm but detached, as if the reality of his actions hadn't yet settled in. Months later, in a crowded courtroom, Derek sat motionless while the jury delivered the verdict: life in prison. Outside, rain began to fall, washing the dust from the streets where his rage had burned out of control. Ethan Morales' family sat in the front row, holding each other, the weight of justice heavy but incomplete. Derek didn't look at them. He stared straight ahead, the same way he had stared down that lonely road, chasing a mom.